It looks like a couple other people are still joining. I'll go ahead and just admit them as we go. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Griffin. For those of you I've spoken with, welcome back. Thank you for joining our webinar. Today, it's going to be over the parts features, specifically parts returns in the process, because it can kind of be a bit tricky, and I just want to make sure that people are familiar. There are a couple ways of doing it. No one way is better than the other. I'll show, most of the ways I know how to do it, and then if you have any questions, again, please use the chat panel, and I'll be happy to address them in the Q&A section, usually about the last 10-15 minutes of the webinar. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me just double check, make sure we're recording. We are, that's good. Okay, so I've got my demo here pulled up, and let's go ahead and open up parts and service. So the first thing, obviously with any return process in any really retail environment, is obviously getting the original ticket information is important. So I've seen a couple, a lot of dealerships, they'll do returns like this. They will create a new invoice entirely. They'll key in the customer's information from scratch. So let's say I put in, my last name here, pull up one of my various entities. You can see already part of that problem could be, well, what if I grab the wrong entity? Well, now I could have the return information on a slightly different entity record than the, the original sale was on. So, this method I don't like because we're freehanding, the selection of the entity. And the part keying in as well, so there's potential there, but obviously it can be done this way. So if I pull in a customer's information, put a part number onto a ticket, really the main thing that's triggering this return process is the fact that I am doing a negative. So if I do a negative sold quantity of 2, okay, the system is going to prompt me with that part, what do I want to do with the negative 2 that we're returning? Are we, A, going to restock them into the inventory? And that's what this first item is going to do. So, if I look down here at my part information, it's telling me I have 681 on hand, 6 on order, 125 allocated. Well, that is actually including my negative 2 in the allocation field. As soon as I go to relieve the negative 2, it's going to put on my on hand, it's going to increase it because we're putting 2 back into inventory. So, a negative value in the relieve column is going to replace these items back into stock when you cash this ticket out. So the value of these, part number 1, 2, 3, the $25.55, since there's 2 of them we're returning, it should be about $51.10 of value being added back into the inventory at the GL level. And this is the only way to get the correct quantities as well, because if a return is not done in a way that it's crediting inventory, if we are truly restocking, we do need to bring those quantities back in correctly. But that's, again, if we are restocking. If we're going to be returning these items for a replacement, the second option here is the return for replacement, where it's picking the default supplier coming off of the part. So as you're all familiar, each part record has a default supplier tied to it. Well, this one's is NTP. So it's thinking that, if we are going to return, it's going to be to NTP. And then you would hit OK there. A similar process is for return for a credit. If you can imagine, basically the difference between return for replacement and return for credit is replacement. You're actually expecting a quantity swap, so you're going to return the part just to get one in its place, versus this scenario where you're getting a credit, or you're basically going to get an AP credit that will reduce your bill with that vendor in the future. So both of these are essentially generating a purchase order that is going to be, the return document back to that vendor. But then the other half of it is, are they actually sending a physical replacement, or are they just crediting you the value of that part? And that's just going to determine which of these 2 options you choose. However, it is going to create the same type of GPO, so it's up to you which one you pick. The last 2 kind of do the same thing as well. It's either a return for no credit, where it's going to also generate a purchase order back to the vendor, but with the expectation that you're expensing the loss of that part value. As is discard items. So discard is going to take the negative 2 that we're trying to put back into inventory, but instead of relieving it back in, it's simply going to discard the items. So these last 2 essentially are going to be if no part value is salvaged out of the return part, and then the top 3 items are going to be basically, are we continuing to sell that item, or are we going to return it for some sort of stock replacement or for a credit? So that'll be, which selection you choose here. So if we're doing a simple restock, pretty simple, you just leave it on restock, hit OK, it put -2 in my relieve column. You'll see that the negative value here is the quantity multiplied by the part cost, any shop supplies or sales tax or anything like that. Usually you want that dollar amount to match the original ticket if you're doing a return, right? You don't want the customer making money on the return that they're doing if the sales tax is wrong. Again, why I don't like this manual method of doing this, because there's room for error. If someone types in the part cost wrong, or the wrong vendors, or I'm sorry, the wrong customer is chosen, and the price rate is different, the calculation they get is different from the other version of their entity records. So there's a lot that can go wrong by doing this by hand. But the rest of the process is normal. You would cash this out. It's going to ask you to credit back to the customer $54. So if I hit cash out here, it's going to say, since the balance is less than 0, we're refunding the customer, or giving them an accounts receivable balance, or a negative accounts receivable balance. But let's say they paid with cash originally, we will return them cash payment, print, email my receipt, or do both. I'm just going to hit the email button. But that's doing this process by hand. Again, there's a lot of manual input, chance that someone could key something in incorrectly. I don't really like it. So I would prefer you do the method that picks all that information for you. And all you're left to do is tell the system, well, what do we want to do with the part now that it's being returned? So we'll go ahead and get out of my receipt message, since I don't need that. And let's go back in. So let's say the customer is returned a couple days after their purchase, and they present us with a receipt. So the receipts in our system, if you're familiar with the customer copy that you print out of an invoice, has a barcode on it. So if that customer brings back that barcode copy, you can actually scan it directly. So I'm going to take an example. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a scanner tied or set up on my machine, but I'm going to show you this process. So if I take this ticket here, we'll do this one here for $124, or I'm sorry, ticket number 124044. From here, what we would do is we would create a new invoice, just like we did before. But rather than keying in my customer information, my parts information, since the customer brought back their customer copy, I can hit the apply return button, and you can either scan the invoice, which would just be using your scan gun and pointing it at the the barcode on the customer copy. That will automatically pull in that entire invoice. Or I can do as though I'm going to have to, which is just typing it in. So 124044, hit OK. So now it's going to prompt me. It looks like one part was sold on that ticket. So what am I doing for that one? If we restock it as our previous one, it would be just that. But let's say we're returning this for a replacement part for this customer. So we'll say defective part, returning for replacement. So with that selection being made, it's not going to take us to the PO right now. It's just going to simply create our invoice. Here is our invoice value. The parts that were on it, it was just one part. There was a discount on the original invoice, so it's capturing that discount, which again, we wouldn't have known unless we pulled up the original ticket. So again, you can see the advantage of the ticket being carbon copied, but just as a negative, because now all I have to do is the cash out process. So again, applying a return is much easier and less room for error by doing it that method. And we'll do another one here in a moment, but I want to show you after we went ahead and said cash out, it's going to give you the original cash out information. Because we linked this to another invoice, it's easy for me to see that this customer paid this ticket in 3 separate ways: a cash, Visa card, and a check. And the dollar amounts are different than what we're seeing here. There was probably some deposits put down or something else on this ticket. But it's just asking for us what we've done as a return. Well, let's say it was cash. We'll do the cash version just like before, email our receipt, and the same. But we did tell the system that we are going to return that part for a replacement. So we want to find our purchase order that the system is generating, okay? And that is going to be found in the core maintenance screen. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of my receipt copy. I don't need to send that to my customer. What I want to show you is the core maintenance screen down here, number 601. Not a lot of people are familiar with it. They don't use it too often. But what it does is every time you do a return, just like that negative $12 we just did, when I go to the core maintenance screen, If I sort by my document date, up there at the very top, there is the first invoice we cashed out. It looks like we have to wait for the routine to transfer for the other one we just did. But for this first one we did just a moment ago, here is that part. And it's asking, oh no, this is the one we just did. And it's asking us to return for replacement. The reason the dollar amount is different is, remember, that customer had a discount. They had an $11 discount on their part cost. So that's why we're seeing it a bit less. So now that this record's here, there's two options. First, you're going to see the return invoice. So if I hit return here, it's going to show me the GPO that the system created, which is going to be a -1. It's going to want me to fill out the value here, because remember that part had a different cost on it than the discount. So it's, do I apply a discount here? Do I do it the full cost? That's up for me to decide, when I'm doing the return process. But what the system's going to do is it's going to take whatever my cost is, multiply it by -1, and reduce it from this account here. Well, if you have our standard chart of accounts, this is our parts and accessories inventory account. So we're taking the value of part number 123 out of it, assuming it's $24. We would be putting 24 here. And then it's going to create a negative payable or a credit memo to NTP that they owe us $24. Well, what's going to happen is, let's say this happens and when we return this item, we do return. Are you ready to ship it? Yes. It's going to ask me for an entity reference. So this would be my return invoice number. So maybe whatever the packing slip number that we've chosen to use. Once that return has been processed, you're going to get one in the mail. A couple days go by, or maybe a week, depending upon, how close your nearest NTP is. But once you receive that part, you're going to receive that into inventory. Well, if you receive it in at a $24 part cost, you're going to have a positive $24 in accounts payable, and you're going to have that negative that we just created from our our purchase order here. So those will wash to zero. Accounts payable doesn't have to send anything to NTP. The accounts payable balances out, and now your parts inventory has received in the one that replaced the broken defective part. The remaining options on this screen are the customer return button, which basically just shows you, here's the invoice that this return came from, right? If you needed to reference where it came from, and this is the parts ticket we did. And then the packing slip is just, this is a printout version of our PO that we saw that we could then run a print it and stick a copy of this in the box as we send it back. So that's really the full return process. And you can see in here, it's showing you shipped for replacement. And, basically you're either going to see if there's something that's here to return for credit, if it's a core return, or if it's something specific for, some sort of part return for a customer. So this process doesn't really change too much if we're returning for a credit memo instead of an actual part, right? Because if we go in here, and same thing, we'll do a new invoice. Let's reference another one we've got in here. Let's take this, this $27 ticket here. Ticket number 124099. Apply return, 124099. Should be, what are we going to do for this part? If I return for credit, process is the same as normal. Negative $27.47. I would cash this out, and then I would go to my core maintenance screen, print out my purchase order that is a return for credit. We're not going to get any sort of part or anything from NTP in this example. We're just going to end up with a credit memo that we can apply this negative $27.47 against one of our future invoices with NTP. So the rest of the process is normal. Cash this out. You can go to your core maintenance screen, and you'll see again up at the very top would be our, once we cash this ticket out, here would be our newest return ready to be processed. So the only difference here is, let's say I remove this part, put it back on, do it as a negative, -1. If I do return for no credit, it's still going to create the GPO, but we're going to offset it to, instead of accounts payable for a credit memo, we would be offsetting it to some sort of expense, showing our debit to our parts, loss or whatever you want to call it, damaged goods, or the P&S adjustments account is usually where I would see that. And then the discard item, of course, is the this is where it's just not going to put it back into inventory, and essentially you're expensing it out through that type of method. So, basically it's just knowing what you need to choose here and going forward. Now you can do different things, like let's say one of those flexible hoses did get restocked because you could fix it, and the other one had to be damaged out. Well, then you would just do -1 here. We'll restock this one, and then we'll add the second one. And since this one needs to be junked out, we'll just do a -1 there and then discard that one. And you can see the relieve is 0 because we don't want to put it -1 and put it back into inventory. We are not gaining back the value of this part since it's being discarded. So it will stay a relieved value of 0 because we chose to discard this item, not to put it back. Okay, so the process is pretty simple. A couple of questions that come up are like partial return. So like, let's say we take this ticket here, the 193. So 123770. So if I do a new invoice and type in apply return 123770. Here's our ticket. It's this isolator battery. Well, this was not a good example because it's only one part. So let's go back. Let's try another one. There's a $1,000 one. That's got to be more than one part. So we'll do new invoice. I'll try this again. 123840. So it added one part. Let's see. So we'll restock this one. Here's my second part. Let's say we don't want to return that part. So we can just leave that one on restock as well. Let's see. This one we are going to restock. And then it's because this is a serialized part, it wants me to verify the serial number tied to the one that we printed out or that's being returned. So that's good. So the first item and the third item we are restocking. The second item the customer is going to keep. Well, in your return invoice, you would simply zero that line item out or just remove it. So now when we process this return, we're not touching the original part that was sold. We're only impacting the items that are being returned back to the dealership. So you can always hit the apply return button to pull the whole invoice in, and then you pick and choose the items that the customer is actually returning and remove the items that they are keeping. So sometimes it may be easier to do that by hand. If you had 40 line items and they're only returning one, well, then maybe I would just create a new ticket with the right the customer on it and just pick that one part number and do a negative on it. So that's an example where typing it in manually may be quicker if they had a larger parts document and they're not returning most of that and it's just one item or so. That's the process. Obviously, freight can be added. If you're billing back freight on your GPOs, if I go back to so let's go ahead and process this one. So let's do this one again. What was it? It was hit apply return 123770. This one's fine. We'll use this isolator battery. So okay, so we're going to go ahead and it didn't prompt me for my what I wanted to do with it, so I'm just going to re-add it. So -1. Oh, it's because it's a core part. That's why. Oh, I have some other people joining the meeting a little late. That's all right. Okay. Let's just do. I'll do another one of these negative, and we will return for replacement. That's fine. Okay. I'll go ahead and mark it as relieved. We'll go ahead and hit cash out. Cash out, so it tells us the cash was the first time this was cashed out, so we know to return cash to the customer. So they're not asking for it back on their card or anything. Now, once this email is ready to go out, now I'm going to go through the core maintenance process and show you how you can just add freight. Okay, we don't need my copy of my receipt. We'll just go ahead and close out. And now let's go to our core maintenance, look at our most recently created return or cashed out return. It is here. So if I go to my return slip, can add, it looks like permissions wise, I can't change my cost here, but with the appropriate permissions to manipulate a return to manufacturer document, I could then upcharge this to be including the freight, so you could say freight charge $10, to show that we did pay an additional $10 to send it back, and whether they're crediting that or not will obviously be on the invoice that they return or whatever they return back. So you just need the permissions to manipulate one of these documents after it's been created. My particular user profile does not, so I'm limited to whatever it comes over as. But that's all. It's just like a regular receiving ticket. Now, I have seen vendors or dealerships skip this core maintenance process as a whole. And what they actually prefer to do is they just go right to the new receiving ticket. They come over here and pick who they're returning to, NTP. And then they say, okay, here's my part number, 123. They do a negative quantity received, so -2. And this is essentially doing the same thing. It's going to reduce the inventory value by the quantity multiplied by the cost. So we've got $48 leaving inventory. And it's going to create a negative payable to NTP as essentially a credit memo. So if they are, in fact, crediting the value of the parts returned, you could do this return this way as opposed to the other method. Of course, how do you reduce the inventory and charge the customer the negative dollar amount to return the change to them? Well, you really can't this way. So if they are, getting value back for those parts, you can't really do it through this process. This would be either for like broken items that are being returned, or just items that you don't need to have cashed out. Like you go back into the warehouse and you find a broken hose and you want to try and send it back to them to have them fix it or replace it. You could do this method. But if it's something a customer is returning, you do want to go through the invoice side of the process to bring items back into inventory correctly and still be able to charge out the, give change back or to return the funds back to the customer who originally purchased. So if you're just sending back to a vendor, you don't need to do an invoice. You can just do it this way. But if you are accepting it from a customer where you do need to put back into, you do need to charge out what you're returning the money to the customer as, you would want to do it through the invoicing side. But this does usually come up in our sessions asking, can I, because essentially the accounting transaction generated from a negative receiving ticket is the same as that general purchase order we were seeing being generated from the return process. So this is a bit faster, but obviously you can't return money to a customer through this method. So if that's part of your return process in that particular type of transaction, you're going to need to do it through the invoicing side. But that should handle all the parts quantities being correct. It will generate a credit memo if necessary coming back from the supplier. And, or if in the case of the customer, you need to return the funds back to them, doing it through the invoice side can really help. And real quick here, just while we had been talking about it, if I pull up the customer copy of this invoice, you will see that barcode I was talking about. So if they come back in with their, if it's part of your disclaimer that they can come back and return parts as long as they have the original receipt, you can either scan that or scan this barcode here. And that will automatically populate your ticket with, like we talked about. So real easy way to process these. And then it's up to you of how far, are you going in and printing out a PO, or are you simply just notifying NTP that you're sending parts back? So whether you need that document, is kind of depending upon whether you need to come over here and process a packing slip. But it is important to know that this return process here, so if I come over here and I hit return, this return button is generating the accounting that is actually taking the value of this part out of inventory. to then return it. So if you are actually returning the part in some way and not just discarding it or restocking it, you do want to go through this full shipping maintenance process, because this will correctly make the accounting entry to pull items out of inventory while you're currently waiting for the return. And then when you do restock in the new part, great, just do a normal receiving ticket as normal, or it'll be as a credit memo, in which case you can apply it to reduce the cost of a future invoice. So basically is if you're returning all the way back to the vendor, you'll want to step through this process. If you're just returning to the vendor, you can do the negative receiving ticket like we talked about. But if it's a return process where a customer is bringing back a part to return it to the vendor, you're going to want to go from the invoicing side all the way through. So there's definitely a couple methods of doing this. But obviously the most lengthy is going to give you the most detail in the long run. You'll have a paper trail, to see where the customer returned. It's not just one one receiving ticket and you don't know who it was returned for or why. So I would definitely get into the habit, if you're going to go through the process, to do it all the way through. Some departments will prefer to do one end or not the other end. And it can lead to accounting issues, because one person's going to forget to put the invoice in, or, we don't know who returned that part or who that credit should be going to. So as a rule of thumb, I would just do the full process. But aside from that, there's really not any much else that I can think of that comes up in the returns process. Is there anything that you all have run into? I'll kind of, unless there's any other newer parts features that anyone wants to talk about, I'm trying to kind of think through here and see if there's anything new that I haven't seen recently had been talked about. But really, there's been many changes to parts and service so much. There's already quite a bit of information in here. But again, I'll leave the floor open for a few minutes here to review kind of what we've talked about with returns, if there's any questions there. Maybe to talk, before we open up the floor for Q&A, I do believe there's a returned parts report, or parts returns report, as well as our dashboard utility that you may want to review. Now give me a moment here, I have to find it, but I do believe it's in parts reports, items sold report, the returns only version. So if you're ever, if you're looking at some weird profit numbers because your margin's low and you're thinking it's because some negative returns have been impacting it, the quickest report would be to run an item sold, check off the returns only, and then run it by whatever date range you want to look for. So if I say last 2 weeks on our cash out date here for returns only, I haven't transferred transactions yet, so what we've cashed out today probably hasn't flowed over, but as soon as it does, you would capture any of the returns that had been done. And you can pick, of course, just, parts tickets, just service tickets, whichever you prefer. But this is probably the easiest way to isolate those transactions out to know where, which items have been returned. So to kind of add to this report you could use, one of the other items that's going to have information related to what's been returned is the dashboard, or the management dashboard. So if I actually open up the dashboard utility here, okay, I have a question here. Let me show you real quick here the last bit of the parts returns section I was talking about, and then we'll jump to best way to get damaged items or missing items out of inventory. So the parts board that I was talking about was here. So you can customize and create these dashboards custom to your dealership. These are just some templates we have in here. But what I wanted to show you is you can actually see returns in this screen. If you open up the particular parts tickets, you'll see negative revenue in here. I've had questions on why am I seeing negatives in here, and that's always going to be due to a return. So if you ever see a negative margin or negative revenue populating in here and wondering why, it's going to be from a negative invoice. So if you look, here's a good example of it right here. Here's a negative $48 ticket and 95 cents, our negative $25 profit. So it's easy to pick out, even on a big day, you can find the transactions that were returns, or if someone is doing more returns than normal, or if something looks odd, you can capture it line by line here in this parts comparison screen. So, but just again, wanted to show you another place to check it, but usually that item sold report, looking for returns only, is kind of the best method. So to answer this other question, what's the best method to get damaged or missing items out of inventory? At a certain point, you know, there's the process of running a physical and running it that way. Obviously, that usually requires some sort of store shutdown, or, you know, dedicating or allocating a lot of man hours or labor hours to the physical process. But if you're finding that your quantities are wrong as you go, you can spot kind of correct inventory from the master inventory here. Let's use our part number 123 as an example. So if I type in part number 123, says here we have 685, 123 are allocated for a total available of 562, and we've got 6 on order. Well, let's say I went back there and I painstakingly counted all of these flexible hoses, and we only have 650, okay? So you could wait till the end of year to do a physical and damage those items out, or if you just, you know, you found them either damaged or missing, and we need to expense them out of there. Essentially, the truest way to bring inventory back to line, or back into the accounting line, is to, you know, get the quantities in there correct at the right cost, and basically force the remaining amount to an expense, showing we don't know whether those items were stolen or how they got damaged, but we just need to pull the value out of inventory. So to do that from the screen with appropriate permissions, you can go to the bin locations tab. So I don't even know if these bin locations add up appropriately to 685. I don't think they do. 300, 400, 588, 570, 76. It's close. It might be up to about 1, you know. So again, when you're doing this rebinning process, you can recount and re-shift around, because all the system cares about is that the final total on hand number is the sum of all the bins you have here. So I could even in this process say, well, we don't have bins 4 or 3 anymore. You know, it won't let me delete them unless I zero out those bin amounts. But now I can remove those and say, okay, the 650 that I found are in between bins A1 and A2. So if there's 650 and I found 450 in this bin and 200 in this bin, and I'll put 0 in the none bin, as long as this number adds up to this number, it's fine. It won't make an accounting entry if I'm just shifting bins around. Because if I took this 200 and I said actually 235, I can just go ahead and hit the update button, because if you see here, the sum of this is still the total. So if I go to 685 here and I say removed old bins, now it's shifted my bins around for me, but my total didn't change. Well, if my total quantity is changing, like you're actually damaging items out of inventory, as mentioned, you are going to have to change these numbers here. So now I'm going to reduce this to 20. So I'm actually telling the system that we're losing 35 flexible hoses. So what's going to happen is this. If I tell the system, okay, we actually have 650, you know, or let's say, let's use a little bit less drastic of a fix. Let's say of the 685 we counted, 5 were broken. So we'll say, okay, we actually have 650, and I'll say damaging out 5 quantity found in damaged in warehouse. Because these updates and these comments you make, you can track to see who's damaging what out. It's going to tell you who made the adjustment and everything. But what's going to happen is this. If I make this 5 quantity adjustment from 685 down to 680, here's what's going to happen. Well, first, I have to be able to do math. Let's put this back to 230, right? Because now we're back up to our 680 in the bins. So hit update. It made the change, and now I went into the general, and now my quantity is great. So it's that simple, but there's something you need to know on the back end. We did generate an accounting transaction here, and this is what a lot of parts departments don't understand, is they will make adjustments here left and right and not realize what it's doing to accounting. Because in the accounting side of things, we have to reflect that we just removed 5 quantity at a cost of $24 a piece, you know, so for a total of what? 5 times 24, $120 of inventory has now been removed. So we need to credit parts inventory and debit some sort of expense to remove that out of there. So to see that accounting entry, you know, you may not have accounting permissions as a parts employee, but just to show you what that entry looks like and how it, how it's automatically happening, because you can't just go in there and damage stuff out and make stuff disappear. There's always going to be a trail to find that, and that's how we can see if lots of adjustments are happening, why, and are they real adjustments or are parts going missing and we need to track down. So this GL account, this parts and service adjustments account, only ever gets hit by these type of adjustments entry that I just showed you. So if I transfer transactions, okay, and let's see if it made my parts adjustment, because some settings have it so it doesn't make the adjustment on demand like this. It posts it by batch, and that's probably what I'm looking at here, because I see these cash outs we made, but I didn't see the adjustment, and that's probably a company setting that I have on. But here's, actually, let's try it. Tools, post parts adjustments. So these are all the adjustments that have happened since the last time this was generated. And most dealers will not have to run this manually. Usually this will run on its own. On our demo, it's turned off. But basically, this is going in there and checking every quantity adjustment, every cost adjustment, and it's making an accounting entry to make sure everything comes, is brought to the line. So here, there's the ADJ entry, and you can see this has made about $28,000 worth of entry changes based on what has happened in inventory. And I bet you if in our comments here, we search for contains part number 123, we can see the individual cost changes. And if we scroll all the way down, our quantities changed as well. And it'll change you how much the part quantity has changed or how much the cost has changed. And you can see the values changing and relieving. So you can track down and see every little bit of adjustment and see, here's our adjustment. We took 5 out of inventory, so it did 5 multiplied by our $24, or whatever the amount it was that it pulled out. So these adjustments are happening all the time. So yes, it's important to get inventory correct and to damage items out, but know that you can't just, come in here and say, okay, well, we didn't find 40 of these, so we're just going to make them go away. It's always making an accounting entry, and it's always expensing them out, saying, well, we don't know what happened to it, whether it was damaged or lost or broken, but we just need to expense it to show something caused this item to disappear out of inventory. So the easy way is just simply correcting the bin quantities here and making adjustments, but just know that you do want to be detailed in your comment as to why, because eventually, there's reporting that will show here's all the entries that were expensed out of the parts department for the year and the reasons why, because you're going to want to go back through and see, okay, because if everyone is selling parts accurately through the system and everyone is receiving parts back in, obviously your quantities should stay pretty accurate. So whenever there's a discrepancy, that means something bigger could be going on. Either parts aren't being invoiced correctly, maybe they're not being purchased in because the packaging ratio is wrong and a roll of tape is now 100 rolls of tape because it's not 100 feet. So little things like that, these on-hand corrections can help point out why, if they're happening a lot, because usually if everything's being done perfectly, you shouldn't have to adjust the on-hands too much. And obviously there's going to be variance in every store, but you just want to, minimize it as best as you can. So hopefully that's, the best way to show you how to get those broken or damaged items out of inventory. You could do another method real quick here. Let's say you just wanted to discard an item out of inventory. You could come over here and try to cash out a part as -1 and say you're going to discard it, but now how do you cash it out, right? It's basically when you're cashing it out, it's going to ask for money or to return the money. Well, we don't have a we don't have a customer to return money to if I'm just trying to damage this part out. So the long way of doing it here is doing what we just did, doing a negative and discarding the item. But what you're actually wanting to do is you're going to change the parts type to policy. And when you change it to policy, you have the ability to expense directly on the policy GL here. So if the parts department found a broken part and has no explanation other than that the parts department is paying, the expense to say, hey, we're just going to damage this out, you would pick the policy GL for parts and cash this out. So now it'll allow me to cash this out internally without asking for money or anything. And now we're just basically making the same entry that we would have done from the master inventory. We're reducing the inventory value by the cost of the part, so negative 25 bucks, and we're debiting the expense of showing that for whatever reason this part is either missing, damaged, or gone. And that takes it out. You said the backwards should be the +1 quantity to add it back in to inventory, or removing it? Because to remove if you're taking it out of inventory, if we have our part number 123 here, before I relieve it, our total on hand is 680, and if I relieve it, selling the part to a policy, then yeah, you would want to do it as positive because you wouldn't want a negative go into the policy expense. So yeah, so the policy would be the normal process. You wouldn't actually do it as a negative. You would just be expensing it out. So again, a longer process when in reality, I think the easiest way or the most appropriate way would be the master inventory method and the bin location adjustment. So good catch there. Thank you. I would normally not recommend doing it that way because I see this one as being the better method to discard items out. So, and as long as your staff or whoever is doing that is descriptive enough in the comment, there's reporting that you can check down the road to see for the year what have we adjusted or changed, and then what are the comments there because we can track down what is changing. And that report would be in the miscellaneous parts reports here. There's a parts price adjustments or on-hand adjustments as well that basically will track every adjustment entry made. Yes, you can do a receiving ticket to a vendor with a negative quantity. So just to get an idea, when we did the let me open this back up here. When we did the core maintenance GPO, so if I come back over here, I'm just going to pick one of these at random. If I take this parts return for credit invoice, you see the quantities on here, the negative $29.09. When this return is posted, it's going to be crediting this GL account for $29.09 and debiting accounts payable. This is very basic, but can you show on an invoice where you can select which bin to remove the part from? Yes, I can. Thank you. But yeah, so this entry here, this crediting the inventory account, debiting accounts payable, is the exact same entry that a negative receiving ticket is going to make. So if I do a negative receiver back to NTP and do a part number 123, quantity -1, that will reduce inventory by that amount and then credit their accounts payable as a negative. So now, when you are removing a part or discarding a part from inventory, if I go back onto a receiver, and let's say we are returning in part number 123, -1, what are we going to do? We're going to either restock or discard the item from something. To discard, the bin you're choosing is this bin box here. So it's always going to take from the preferred unless I select a different bin here. So if I come over here and highlight bin A2 and hit OK, now when this item gets removed from a certain bin, either added to or removed from, it's going to choose this bin. So, and this goes for any sale and any return. So which bin are you returning into? Which bin are you selling from? It's selected here. So always going to take from the preferred until you make the manual selection to choose otherwise. And if you do want to change the preferred, it's just coming over here and changing that preferred checkbox on this screen here. Okay, I hope that answered your question. But yeah, good call. It's definitely where you're restocking it into is always an afterthought, it seems, and it ends up in the wrong bin or the wrong place. So, again, as you guys can see, this is all something that can be done in multiple ways. It's just which process suits your dealership the best, what's the easiest. Is there, another question here, is there a way to have a certain terminal always pull from a certain bin? So you mean like a certain one person's desktop rather than just one person? Yeah, unfortunately, it's just preferred for everyone. So when I'm on a part, whichever the preferred bin is, every station, no matter whether it's the parts computer or someone in the sales department comes in here, if they did a receiving ticket or tried to sell a part, it's always going to look at the specific preferred bin. It is not per machine, unfortunately. You can force users to use a specific bin by turning on the permissions to use the master bin control list, and then using this bin's location list and forcing everyone to only use what's here. But obviously that's, one, you have the entire store set up by bin and everything is in the right row and everything. And two, this still doesn't change that, if I go into a ticket, I can still change it from the preferred to anything. But it prevents the main reason to do it through the master bin list is no one's going to be coming in here and creating bins. As you may have seen in the past, you'll have an additional line here that allows you to create bins on the fly, but forcing folks to use from the master bin list, that way they don't create, A1 and then lowercase a1 and, it'd be a pain. So, but that doesn't really pertain, I don't think, to your question. Yours is mostly just terminal specific preferred, and unfortunately it's one preferred box for everybody. So, but good questions though, thank you. That's pretty much all I've got on the process as a whole. I'll go ahead and leave the floor open for the next about 10 minutes or so. Any other questions kind of relating to parts, even if it's not really related to returns, I'll try to answer it as best I can. And then, like I said, eventually these will, I think all of them are getting posted as they finish them, or they're getting posted all at once. I'm not 100% sure, but you will be able to find this recording alongside, all the other webinars we've done so far this year onto the website soon. But again, I'll leave it open for a few more minutes. Thank you for the good questions so far, and I hope this has been informative. But let me know any questions, concerns, or any other parts-related issues you guys have. Another question, what is the best method to add a no-charge part to a ticket? So essentially, basically, was this a no-charge part that was received in, like, buy 10, get 1 free type of deal with a required return? Like vendor warranty. Zeroing the part out on the ticket is really the only way, and obviously it's on a case-by-case basis of what they're paying or what is approved. Sometimes I'll see a miscellaneous part used in the interim. I just opened a random ticket here for warranty as like a placeholder. They may not know what will get covered, so they'll start with like a MISC part. And either leave the charge out at 0, like they'll leave the actual part number on here, but then, zero it out and put whatever the warranty's paying on the miscellaneous line. I've also seen actual specific warranty miscellaneous or warranty part that is used as a placeholder for that. But generally, to get the claim matching, what you're actually claiming, usually you're just going to be zeroing that price out on that particular line on a per invoice basis. But that's why I have seen some departments actually set up their own specific warranty part outside of that, which I don't recommend, because for tracking purposes and getting POs out there with tracking numbers, it's better to not use a miscellaneous placeholder, because that can confuse everybody in the long run if the parts receiver didn't necessarily know or isn't familiar with the part being ordered. So generally it's going to be adding that part line again a second time, either as a $0, doing the order, and obviously waiting back for the claim information or what is approved. But it's usually requiring manipulation on that part at a level. I mean, are you guys using any sort of placeholder part for it now, or? just kind of zeroing it out as you go. Bringing no charge parts into inventory is pretty easy. It's something where you're doing a placeholder now and linking it to the correct RO and the PO that's coming back on. Yep, and that's where we've run into it in the past is, you know, anytime you're using those placeholders or trying to link it back. The main thing I would make sure you're doing is if you are doing a order, or when you're doing any sort of warranty purchases or warranty ordering, are you doing it from within the ticket itself? If you are, that creates a special flag on the purchase order letting it know that it's a special order. And since it's coming from an invoice, it always has an internal link back to that service ticket. So let's say this flexible hose needs to be ordered for warranty, you know, regardless of what the price is, whether it's $0 or whatever. When you're ordering, if you do it from here and right click on the part and hit place order or place on order, now if I place this directly on order, let's just go ahead and I'll hit order now. I'm going to hit no because I'm not electronically set up through them. Now on the RO, the part's going to be in a, it'll change color based on whether it's on the order list, whether it's ordered. This one is has a substitute part, so that's why it's green. It's letting me know that there's some accessory parts that I should be upselling to this. But because I've ordered this from my document, if I go to the purchase ordering listing, and at the very top, here's my most recent order, it creates a link back to that document in the comments section. And you can see the document that it was ordered from, the customer on the ticket, Jonathan Malice, and if it had their stock number on there, it would have that information there as well. So if you are ordering from the document, let's say I create a receiving ticket now, we can actually have the system update that original invoice with a status letting me know that the special order parts have been received because we ordered from the invoice. So if I type in whatever my reference number is here and I receive this from, you know, my warranty vendor, now if I go back to the original RO that it was ordered from, it's going to show as special order received. So now I have a direct reference knowing, as a matter of fact, you could filter for, you know, first thing in the morning, a service manager could come in and filter for all the special order items received status. Let me get this printing routine turned off. You know, that's an easy way to see, but you can see right there, Jonathan Malice up there at the very top, there's the one we ordered from. The one thing it will not do is when I receive the part, it doesn't automatically relieve it here. But that PO is always internally linked because I ordered directly from the invoice. Furthermore, you know, so now any of my purchase orderings, if you look here in the purchase order listing, do you see how there's a special order column? Because I ordered from that invoice, if I type in the guy's last name, Malice, and I go to the fulfilled listing, it's right there up at the top. There's the one we just did, and it's got his name stamped on there because we ordered from within the RO. So basically, and this works for parts tickets too. So if I actually could put the customer on this ticket and place it on order, now it's all linked back. Okay, so question is Dometic AC, they send us a new unit, no charge. We want to give them a PO number, so we use a miscellaneous part number to add it to the order list. Now, if we don't return the old one, we will be billed for it. Nothing generates a core return that you just explained. But you're just adding that miscellaneous part to the order list. You're not actually creating like a document over here where you're doing MISC and then return. You know, return for replacement. You may, in this particular process, you may just want to do a negative receiving ticket. Is probably the best way to handle that. New unit, no charge. We will be billed for it. Yeah, so basically, in your newest, and when you receive in that new AC from Dometic, you'd come over here and pick Dometic. Are you all set to average cost or replacement cost? Replacement cost, okay. So it would just be making sure you attend to it. So if I add a Dometic part in here, I go to description, I type in AC. Oh, that doesn't work. I got to do my part search first. I think I can do it here. Nope, you can't. Can I do asterisk? Nope. Okay. So let's just use my part number 123 as an example because I got that one memorized. So you would be receiving this in, receive 1, cost is 0. You would receive that part in. You might reference number. Receive that item in. No, thank you. Now, because my cost is 0, you know, it's added so we had 680, now we have 61. Yeah, which goes to which unit. The best thing I could say is the receiving ticket from without a PO, comments-wise, it would be, see, I'm just trying to think, I guess it would be a place of storing that information to stock number to that receiving ticket. Or have you ever used, you link the, not link, but you can use the receiving ticket number here. So 16105. You could put it into the customer PO number field. I know it's not exactly a customer PO number, but you can search off of this. So let's say you've got that refrigerator labeled going to a certain customer and you've got the receiving number on it. You could, as long as you've linked it there, you know, let's say I put the customer PO number there, you can always search it up through the customer PO information here. That would, of course, require labeling that RO with that information. And how do I track which bad AC gets returned to each RO? At that point, it almost becomes a note-taking procedure to get all that information in there. You know, trying to get all of that somehow notated on the RO, which one's returned, what was the return invoice packing slip number. Yeah, that's tricky. Are you guys doing anything with current notes, trying to track, you know, some of that return information or the parts requests on those? Because that's probably the closest, you know, we have. Is it's going to be a manual process getting information in there, and it's okay. Yeah. Aside from just trying to take detailed notes and get them, again, it has to be linked through a PO. So if you're just doing the receiving side, there's really no direct link back to this, as you guys have stated. I think some sort of physical reminder on the physical unit itself may be the best bet. You know, the only other thing I could think would be maybe printing out a copy of the packing slip or the core maintenance sheet that you can print out, you know, and taping that to it or something and having a reference, because then you'd have the customer's name, the RO number, and who it was for, alongside possibly the packing slip information of what, you know, return information. But yeah, there's got to be some way to kind of get the physical information into here. And aside from a serial number on the unit itself, it's probably some sort of visual notifications as good as it's going to get. So yeah, unfortunately, the linking process is done from the PO side of things, not just the receiving ticket. So, you know, if it was on the receiving side, great, we would just link it in there. And unfortunately, you can type into the comments section, you know, what the RO number is, but that doesn't inherently link it. We have had requests in the past for there to be like a ordered parts button on here where you could click it and it would show all the receiving tickets that have been tied to it. That was actually just suggested in our idea box that we have added recently. And a couple other people have mentioned that in the past. So not sure if that's something we might visit, but you never know. Any other feedback like that definitely helps. So we're definitely trying to get a way that's it's easier for service to know what's been ordered, what's outstanding, rather than having to track down, you know, the parts department, and vice versa. So, but thank you for the questions. You know, that definitely it's nice to see, or I'm always curious to hear the different obstacles that different parts departments run into, which ones are doing the processes differently. Some will do the receiving ticket as a negative for their process. Others will do it through the invoice. So, you know, everyone's doing a little bit differently, and I just want to make sure everyone's familiar that there's more than just one way of doing it. So, but again, like I mentioned, this session has been recorded. We will be posting these on our website along with the other webinars that have been done. I've got another session coming up here in the next 15 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and prepare for that. I think thank you all for your time joining and with good questions. If you have any other follow-up, definitely let either the support department know, or our marketing is going to get out the remaining webinars. I believe the next one is next Tuesday. I believe same time, 1 o'clock Eastern. So we hope to hear from you then. And if not, good luck to everybody, and definitely let us know if there's anything else you got. All right. Thanks again.